much. Thank you so much. I am Phyllis's grandson. I am Margaret's son. I am somebody's grandbaby. My grandmother, Phyllis Carrow, who was born Phyllis Fitzgerald, but actually Wakefield, my great-grandfather changed the family name to Dodge a Bill Collector. It was easier to do in the 1920s. She was an interesting woman. She was a very interesting woman, also somebody's grandbaby. And what's important to remember when we think about these things, that who we are and who we have been and who we are connected to, we have more in common than what makes us different. I want you to look around this sanctuary right now. Make eye contact, if you will. For some of you, that'll be a little intimidating. You can also have the eyes down a little bit. I know, it's a cultural thing. Remember, each person here is somebody's grandbaby. Now, my grandmother loved me. She also loved when I decided to take over cooking the turkey for family holidays. My grandmother was not a very good cook. She died about 10 years ago, earlier this month, and I love to think that I was her favorite. She might have told me as much as well. When we're somebody's grandbaby, when we behold somebody's grandbaby, no matter what relationship we had to our own grandparents, to our own elders, or even whether or not we actually like children, not the point. We treat people differently. And so when you know who I am, when you know that I'm Phyllis's grandbaby, that I'm Henry's grandbaby, that I'm the grandbaby of Gregory Boyd on my father's side, whom I don't know very well, you can also put yourselves in your own story of being somebody's grandbaby. You can put everyone else in here of the story of being somebody's grandbaby. I titled our message today, both in Hawaiian and in English, importantly, because when we think about Hawaiian relationships, we are often talking about a cycle of relationships. Daughter and sister and girl child can mean the same thing. Elder is everyone. Moʻopuna is everyone's grandbaby, everyone's younger person that we're taking care of. So let's, for a moment, think about who we are. Close your eyes, if you will, and engage this thought experiment with me. We are flowing through generations and generations of self. We have ancestors in our recent past that we may have troubled relationships with. We have ancestors in our distant past that we may have troubled relationships with. Nonetheless, they make up who we are. Thinking of who we are and then continuing to move forward, someday we will all be ancestors. And I pray that we are good ancestors. I pray that we are worthy of the praise of our descendants. That is also who we are, in a state of being descendant and in a state of being ancestor. Whenever you are ready, come back to this space. Slowly blink your eyelids open. Do you know who you are? Do you know who you can be? Who we are as a community is dependent on all of the ways that we answer both of those questions. How we are to be as descendants and how we must be as future ancestors. So this reminds me of a conversation that I had earlier this week with some congregational leaders, where I was talking about behavior in this congregation, behavior really in Unitarian Universalist communities. And I quoted Dr. Maya Angelou, who used to remind us that when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Now that sounds harsh, I get it, and she meant it with full venom. We can't be surprised when people treat us the way that they indicated that they might. Now, to this, the leader responded to me with the words of Brian Stevenson, who is a renowned lawyer, especially for his exoneration work around innocence and restorative practices. He reminds us, and it's a very universalist type of sentiment, that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. That's universalism in a single sentence, all right? No matter what we do, we are ultimately forgiven by the divine. That don't mean I have to forgive you. And I don't believe in easy forgiveness, and I pray that you don't either. When we hurt one another, when we harm one another, even unintentionally, it is important that we understand the dimensions of that harm. That is the precondition for true forgiveness. I'm sorry doesn't make harm go away. It is the first action that we must take before we can truly begin to reconcile, before we can truly begin to transform. Again, reconciliation or restoration means going back to the way things were before. But if the way things were before were conditions that allowed for the harm that happened, maybe that's a state we don't return to. Maybe we build a better state so that we can move forward together. What I thought was interesting with this conversation I was having with the congregational leader is Dr. Angelou's statement, believe who people show you who they are, and Stevenson's statement that we're better than the worst thing we've done, or that we're more, perhaps, than the worst thing we've ever done, are not actually opposed to one another. They don't mean different things. And I think this is important because there's an interior narrative of Black culture written into both of these things. I can receive you as you show yourself to be, at the same time that I know you're capable of so much more. I can receive you exactly as you are. At the same time, I pray that you will create relationship with me that lets me in, that allows me to be with you in whatever work we're doing together. The work of building beloved community requires us to be vulnerable. And that also means that we need to make sure we're communicating in a way that makes sense to one another. Do you follow? Someone tell me what I just said. Make sure people understand you. How do we do that? Listen, ask. What else can we do?
Sometimes being vulnerable ourselves.
Sometimes being vulnerable ourselves. Go ahead. Repeat back to them what they said. She understood the assignment. Put our intentions in the back seat. Richard offers something important here as that issue that we often run into about the difference between intent and impact, right? I can have full intention just to get out of the parking lot, and if I run over your foot in the process, it hurts. I am not going to get mad at you because you didn't realize I didn't mean to run over your foot. I'm going to get out the car, say I'm sorry, and try to help you. Sometimes we forget, and it's easy to, because when we're called to account for our behavior, it can make us realize that we were inattentive. It can make us realize that we weren't doing all that we could. And honestly, very few of us can do all that we can all of the time. I don't need you to exhaust yourselves building beloved community. I need you to give just enough so that we can get there together. Sometimes when we are called to account, it is a level of vulnerability we were neither prepared for, nor were we seeking out. And nonetheless, here we are. Everywhere we go, here we are. And now I am seen. And now I have to deal with, my behaviors maybe didn't match up with my intentions. I did the best I could, and it still had an outcome that was different than what I expected, or even what I hoped for. Or even worse, we did something together, and still the outcome was not what we hoped for, not what we were working toward, not what we need in this time and in this space. So we're more than the worst things that we've ever done. And also, as Reverend Elizabeth Wynn has said, who's a frequent preacher with us, who we are on our worst days is who we really are. So let's take that all together. All right? We're going to do some weaving work right now. We're who we show ourselves to be, and who we are at our worst is who maybe we've always been. But we can get better together. We can ask more questions. We can understand one another by making sure that people understand what we did say, sometimes by asking them to repeat what we said. And we can be compassionate. We can have passion for the process of building beloved community together. We can have passion for the process of understanding that even when we try our hardest, occasionally, or maybe even frequently, we might fail. And most importantly, we can accept the consequences of our actions, even if they're unintended. Once again, if I am trying to get out of the parking lot in that rented Prius I have today, and I run over your foot, I'm not going to get mad at you because at least I'm driving an electric car. Two things can be true at the same time. I can be doing good in one domain of my life and still have an impact that is negative in another one. And so too can all of us. So when we hold that together, when we remember, importantly, that we're all somebody's grandbaby, when we remember that occasionally we will misbehave like somebody's grandbaby does, when we remember that getting older and wiser together can require correction, accountability, and truth-telling, that's one of the ways we can have compassion for one another. When we remember to treat everyone as if we're somebody's grandbaby, because again, we all are, we also remember all of the ways that we're connected through all space and all time. In our quest to build the beloved community, we are going to fail far more frequently than we succeed. And I pray, as I always do when we learn these things together, that we can fail forward, make better mistakes. And the way that we make better mistakes is by being in relationship, by making sure we understand one another, and most importantly, by calling one another to account, especially when our actions don't match our intent or when the impact of our actions doesn't line up with our deepest shared hopes of this community. Say together with me, Amen,
Amen.
Ashe, and blessed be.